Welcome to Data Week and to Valerio's session on deep learning for health and life sciences. Hopefully you can hear us okay and see the Data Week Online 2020 screen. If you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be really nice. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Jean Golding Institute, who are running this event and the other things that we do. And then I'm going to hand over to Valerio for the session. So probably I'll start in 1 or 2 minutes. Okay, so great that everyone can see. Thanks for bearing with us. This is our first time using the events version of BlueJeans instead of the regular version, so it's just a few differences and things that we had to figure out. But welcome to Data Week 2020. So this is an event that the Jean Golding Institute runs every year, usually in person. And obviously this year we've had to do things a little differently. So this is actually the last day of Data Week. So we've had a whole bunch of different events all week, and thanks for joining if you joined for any of those. My name's Natalie Thirlby. I'm a data scientist at the Jean Golding Institute. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it. Can I have the next slide, please, Valerio?
Sure.
Thank you.
Did it change? No?
Not yet, no.
Right.
Now I can see it, yeah. So the Jean Golding Institute is part of the University of Bristol. So it's a research institute for data science and data intensive research. So at the University of Bristol, we have 5 of these type of institutes, and all of them try to encourage interdisciplinary research in their own kind of area. And for us, obviously, it's data science and data intensive research. And we do this in lots of different ways. So one of these ways is events like we're doing here in training. We also provide CCON funding every year. So this is small amounts of funding up to about £5,000. And we do this usually every autumn. And it's available kind of like postdoc level and above. So if you've got kind of a new and exciting idea that you'd want to try out, or maybe prototype, that's a really good pot of money to keep your eyes peeled for. We also have something called the Ask JGI service. So this is if you have any questions about data science, maybe in your research, for example, or how do I scrape this data from this website, or I've been trying to apply deep learning to this question, but I'm not quite sure what the best way to do it is. You can email ask-jg@bristol.ac.uk, and usually I will reply, and if I don't know the answer, then I will call on the great network of experts that we have here in Bristol to help me answer that question for you. The Jean Golding Institute is also the way that the University of Bristol is connected to the Alan Turing Institute, which is the National Institute for Data Science. So by kind of keeping in the loop with us, you'll hear about the different events that they're offering and the different funding opportunities to be a Turing Fellow and this kind of thing. And we have kind of 4 big priorities that we always try to kind of work towards. So one is societal challenges. So this is kind of like using data science for good, applying it to areas, for example, food security or ethics and machine learning. And the second is data visualization. we have a data visualization interest group at the university, and before coronavirus we had quite regular meetings and lectures. There's a mailing list for that. There's also going to be in mid-July we're opening a competition, data visualization competition, which is going to have £1,000 prize for the winner and 2 runner-up prizes of £250 each. So if you wanted to maybe like try out a new D3 library or just kind of flex your data science skills, that would be a good thing to look out for. The other thing that we care about, and this is something I particularly care about, is reproducible research. This is something that the University of Bristol is really great for, is like the centre of the UKRN, so the UK Reproducibility Network. And obviously we're also very interested in fundamental research and algorithms and that kind of thing. So that's just a little bit about us. Can I have the next slide, please, Valerio? This is just some of the different events we've had this week. Obviously, we're at the end of the week now, but just wanted to highlight some of these things that have been happening. And this is kind of more of, you can expect these kind of events to happen again in the future. Next slide, please.
That's it.
Okay, so I also just wanted to let you know like how to stay in touch with us. So you can join our mailing list. We're also on Twitter at JGI Bristol. And one other thing I wanted to give a shout out to was an event that we're running at the moment, which is data science co-working. It's every Tuesday afternoon, and it's basically we just kind of work together on our own work using the Pomodoro technique, which is kind of 25 minutes of work and then a break. Here it is. Thank you. Great, thanks. And so if you're interested in any of those things I just mentioned, funding, events, training, then yeah, please join our mailing list or get in touch with us on Twitter. One thing I'd just like to do now, I'm not sure if it's possible on this new events system, but we've been trying to take a kind of screenshot of everybody in the event at the beginning. So if you could just turn your videos on for a second. I'm not sure how this is gonna work out, but let's try. Is it possible? Do attendees have this power? I can't see anyone else, which makes me think that maybe it's not possible, but can you say in the chat if you've managed it? Okay, we can't. Okay, sorry about that. In that case then, I just want to really thank Valerio for this session that he's about to do for us and hand over to him. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and it's really nice for me to be part of this event. It's been a really interesting week, full of really interesting events, and the idea I had about the workshop was basically coming at the end, mostly because during this week there have been already workshops tackling the problem of deep learning. Yesterday was the deep learning tutorial, but before it was like a whole tutoring about data science, and so attendees during this week have already got a very good introduction to most of the main topic related to data science and machine learning. I wanted to specialize it a little bit about what I do as a researcher, and so that's why the title Deep Learning for Health and Life Science. And I'm going also to talk about a new tool, a new library, which I reckon has not been mentioned yet, not even yesterday into the deep learning tutorial. And there's actually a good not a good reason, but there's actually a reason why that didn't happen. I will tell you in a second. So a little bit about myself. Let me see if I can manage to control this presentation without it taking control. Right, a little bit about myself. I have a background in computer science and have a PhD in machine learning, particularly applied for software engineering. And my current research focuses on, as you might expect, probably biomedicine and bioinformatics. I am currently a research associate at the Population Health Science, and I do work at the Dynamic Genetics Lab. I wanted to start this, so I had a very good thought about what to include, what not to include in this tutorial. I had really lots of things I wanted to share with you, and I'll try to do my best in sharing what I had in mind. I wanted to start this workshop on this introductory deck slides, just to give you the context. And considering the fact that I don't really know the background of any of you, I will try to cover the most of it, since we're going to talk about two different domains basically joining together into one single workshop. What it is machine learning? Machine learning has plenty of definitions. Okay? Most of them are quite straightforward, and I just collected some of my favorites. The first one, and I quote, is machine learning is the science and the art of programming computers so they can learn from data. There's another one from Deep Learning with Keras. That's a book saying machine learning focuses on teaching computers how to learn without the need to be programmed for specific tasks. So I joined these two definitions basically because they both introduce the concept of programming the knowledge within computers. There are also other definitions, like, this is quite brilliant actually. It says machine learning teaches machines how to carry out tasks by themselves. It is really that simple. The complexity comes with the details, and we're going to probably see plenty of details today about that. It was kind of a in-fashion thing some years ago, generating these words clouds, in which you basically collect all the most relevant words. So the size of the word in this cloud is related to how important is the word with respect to the context, to the topic, to the context. And I usually introduce this cloud basically because it points out some of the things I do personally like the most about machine learning. So machine learning in general is about data, and as you can see, is very evident in this cloud. And there's also a very big one, big word, which is algorithms. So on one hand, you may expect that data preparation is crucial, and we're going to see, hopefully today, quite extensively, how this concept of data preparation and working with data also joins and brings into the machine learning practice. And also another important bit is about the algorithm. And the algorithm means that basically you can program it. You can make it working by writing a procedure, writing code that actually works. So that's indeed the machine part into the machine learning definition. The machine refers to algorithms indeed. And of course, the last bit is data is related heavily about learning by examples. So that's the kind of learn that we're going to set up. So what about biomedicine in particular? And what about healthcare and life science? Is it really another data case? It is quite an interesting context. Nowadays, machine learning and deep learning seems to be applied in any kind of field of science. In this particular case, in the case of contemporary life science, is particularly interesting, mostly because this sort of science field, no more than 10 years ago, was basically used to process data manually, and the development in technologies to produce high quantity of data has completely changed the scientific investigation, scientific paradigm. So now huge data sets have been generated, and so they cannot be manually processed anymore, and that's why algorithms are necessary. And machine learning plays a big part in it, and giving also the possibility to generate even novel fields in the topic, as in cheminformatics, for instance, which is particularly focused in drug discovery, which nowadays we hear a lot about deep learning. And another bit that I do personally find interesting is that the impact of research in this particular field is also a social and human impact. So this is particularly interesting, personally speaking. So among the machine learning world, why specifically deep learning? I just collected a couple of most relevant papers I could find taken from the last couple of years, and I could add more and more on that. So more and more paper actually talking about deep learning. And why deep learning specifically? Well, on one hand, I do believe that sometimes it is overhyped at the moment. So everyone has to try deep learning at any cost. So and we're gonna slightly talk about this particular topic in more details. But indeed, deep learning has a very nice feature with respect to classical machine learning, is in the fact that it changes completely the learning structure, and it also allows for composability. So you can stack different components. You can join different components, different models together in order to build a more complex model. So the higher the complexity, the higher of the model, the higher the complexity of the data you can learn from. So a little bit of introduction of deep learning, just to have everyone on the same page. So this is the basic of deep learning. This is what is called a deep network. So technically, this is defined as a multi-layer feed-forward neural network that starts with an input layer, which is fully connected, which is then followed by a multiple layer of non-linear transformation. So this is actually the definition you find on the manual. So if that is your face, I will probably tell you that there's a lot of details I could talk about, but I assure you it's really easy, essentially speaking. So if we have a look at what a neural network is indeed, is a model in which you have these connections between what is called neurons, but indeed is a series of features connecting one after the other. You have, in this particular configuration, you have data coming from the left-hand side and going to the right-hand side, and so passing through the different layers. And everything is connected. All these connections are basically linear operations. So if you take a pairs, they're just linear operations. What you can do to make the model more complex is adding some nonlinearity. So talking about activation functions and nonlinearity in this specific context. So and once you have this building block, basically you repeat this one. And so you have linearity plus nonlinearity, you stack them up, everything, you repeat layer by layer. And so the output of one layer becomes the input of the other one. And so you end up having this deep network. And these had the sort of models have outperformed in many tasks. One of the most popular one is about image classification task, and we're going to see how this model can be used into the medical field, for instance. So, in summary, our neural network is built from layers, and each of which is basically a matrix classification. Then you add bias, so you have the linear model, and then you apply nonlinearity, and you stack this layer by layer, and the values of your parameters, so basically the weights and the bias, are learned using an optimization problem, relying on the backpropagation algorithm. I will tell you later on a little bit about it. So essentially, I usually include this slide because I particularly liked it. And if I wanted to explain machine learning for dummies, or as I used to say, machine learning explained to computer scientists, and by the way, I am a computer scientist, I want to make it things simple. And so you can say that machine learning is indeed essentially, or the 90% of the case, is matrix multiplication plus random number generation. And if you take this block and you basically elevate to the power of 2, you basically have deep learning. So this is it at the very end. So my takeaway message here is that even if the complexity comes with details, and I assure you there are plenty of details, the essential building blocks are really simple and there's nothing really complicated about it. So just to give you a little bit of basics. So just to mention what I'm going to do today is to try to jump back and forth into giving you a little bit of introduction of the general concept, trying to deploy this general concepts into the healthcare, into the biomedicine and computational biology field, and see how that is interesting or different, and also trying to give you a very practical introduction by teaching you the main features of PyTorch. So I've tried to do everything all together. So bear with me if there's something not entirely clear. Feel free to shout out or ask questions along the way. Everything is much appreciated. The general kind of framework in which we're moving into is the supervised learning. We're going to extensively talk about this. And the supervised learning setting is built on this schema, which is very simple indeed. We have some raw data on the left-hand side, and we also have labels, and this is what constitutes the supervision. That's why this is called supervised learning. The idea is that we pass from raw data to features that will go into the model, and the model will learn from features and labels. So the feature will represent the actual examples, and the labels will represent the target that the model will use as reference to learn from. And the general idea is that the model will be able to learn from these examples in order to generalize, and so to come up with a trained model which is able to generate predictions which are reliable on unseen data, so data that are different from the ones we've been using in the training step. In the case of unsupervised learning, the only thing that changes is the fact that the labels are missing. So you don't have any more reference. So in that case, the kind of predictions the model are going to produce is slightly different. It's not going to be classification or what number you expect it to be, so a regression, a continuous variable, but it can be similarities or likelihood, for instance. How deep learning changes this concept? Well, there's one important bit in which the supervised learning has changed when it comes to deep learning. The fact that basically the features are now part of the model, so you don't have the double step anymore. Usually, you don't have anymore the fact that you take the raw data, you generate your features, and then you pass this feature to the model. Everything is learned as part of a bigger problem, and this kind of approach is usually referred to as an end-to-end problem. So you start from the raw data and you end up directly to the target of the learning you have in mind, so the target of the predictions, and everything is built inside the deep learning model. This is one of the most important features, for instance, that makes deep learning different from classical machine learning or other methods into machine learning. So the deep learning, again, has basically two souls. One is devoted to learn the features, at the same time also learn how to optimize the predictions that we aim to. The supervised training loop. By the way, I'm going to tell you in details when we go into the practical workshop part. But you will see the whole structure, the whole algorithm that the deep networks or networks in general will be using to do this learning is very, very simple, and it is an algorithm you can implement even if you cannot really be able to program. It's really, really simple. The different components acting into this picture are basically the components we're going to play along a lot during today's workshop. So we always have the data, we have the labels, so we have the target, we have the model, and we also have one function, and a quite important component, which is the last one, the pink or the purple box that you have in the picture. The loss is what controls how the model is basically learning from the data. So the model generates the predictions and passes these predictions to the loss. The loss takes the predictions and the labels and tries to come up with a measure that basically gives the model how far the model is from the right predictions. And the whole objective is basically to minimize this loss. So the more we minimize the loss, the better we're learning. And this optimization problem is also controlling the optimization of the parameters. So is this loop that goes on and on and on until a steady state is achieved, or the number of loops has ended. So that's the algorithm on which deep networks basically learn from data. Okay, so just to give you a bit of more specific and technical terminology, we talk about raw data. Sometimes we also talk about observations. Sometimes we talk about input. Essentially, it's about the data that we use to train the model. We also have the labels, or also known as the target or the ground truth. So you will hear me saying this words quite interchangeably because they do mean the very same thing. So the labels are what corresponds to the observations, and so what we're aiming to into the learning process. The model is indeed a function, and this is what we are actually trying to do. So essentially, you can summarize the problem of learning through machine learning as in the fact that you assume there is a pattern in the data, but you cannot pin down this pattern manually. So you don't know what that pattern is. It's unknown. But you're saying there is a correlation here. And so here we can open a chapter of a book talking about correlation, which is not causation in healthcare, and there's a very interesting topic nowadays, even in the machine learning community. So just to tell you. And but generally, the thing is, you don't know this pattern, so you want the model to approximate this function. So the model is indeed a function that takes the input and generates the prediction, so the output, the y that you're aiming for, the y hat usually referred to. And so y hat and the predictions or the estimates, so the values of the target generated by the model. And we have the parameters. The parameters, also known as the weights in the deep learning terminology. And the weights are basically the parameters that we're changing during the learning. We're adjusting, we're tuning these parameters in order to have the model to learn from the data. That is what is actually under analysis by the loss function. And indeed, the last bit is, of course, the loss function. The loss function is usually a function taking the ground truth and the predictions, and it compares, as I said, observation and the targets, and the lower the value is, the better the model is predicted. Okay, now a bit of less theoretical and more practical. If you're at this workshop, you probably heard about Python, and I bet no one nowadays doesn't know what Python is in the programming language, not the animal, of course. And And I promise the scenario was very, very different 8-10 years ago when I started. And in Python, there is the Zen of Python, and the Zen of Python is basically a sort of decalogue in which you have, I guess, it's 10 series of rules that basically gives you the Zen of what a Python programmer should attain to. And among the Zen of Python, there is this one, which says there should be one preferably, and preferably one way to do it. And indeed, it doesn't seem to be the case. And to be entirely fair, it was never the case, even in different contexts, rather than data science. What I'm trying to say is that even if nowadays, when it comes to classical machine learning, it seems that there is one way to do it, although there is scikit-learn is the package of reference for classical machine learning. Let me say, so when I just to make it clear, when I'm going to say today machine learning, it's just to refer to something which is not deep learning, not because they are two different things, and you will see they're very, very connected, but just to differentiate what is deep learning and what is not. And so nowadays scikit-learn seems to be the reference, but in the deep learning side of the slide, the scenario is very, very different. So we have PyTorch. If you attended the workshop yesterday, you probably heard about TensorFlow and Keras, and these are the two most popular at the moment, but there are plenty more. I just cited the more popular, as in Theano Chainer, MXNet, for instance. And I'm following this evolution of these technologies for quite a long time, like 4 years. I'm working with these technologies, and I tell you that things have changed a lot along the years. And I usually introduce this concept of multiple frameworks with a question mark, as in, is it really different? There's this tweet from François Chollet, which is indeed the creator of Keras, and which posted this implementation and challenging the Twitter audience, saying, could you guess which framework is in which implementation? If you know a little bit of those, you can spot it, but at a glance, they don't really look very different. So this means that basically, even if they're different, the kind of philosophy and implementation is basically heading towards the very same direction. We're going to talk about PyTorch for many reasons, and for some features that it has with respect to other frameworks, and we're going to discover it along the way. That's my hope. And just to clarify, if someone tells you, wait, you're saying neural networks, I have neural networks in scikit-learn. Well, that is not technically deep learning, and this is also what the scikit-learn developers say, because scikit-learn has no support for GPU, and we will realize, and if you practice it a little bit about it, you immediately realize that you need computational power in order to run this big model, because the number of parameters has increased heavily, and so you need more power, more computational power to run it. And the multi-layer perceptron classifier, including scikit-learn, is definitely not. It's definitely not a deep network. Regardless of the different implementation, nowadays, at the moment, we can still differentiate deep learning frameworks in two big families, and the difference is in how they do intend the learning process to be implemented and deployed. On the left-hand side, we have the static graph. In case you can't see it, I probably will show you in more details why there is this graph to express the computation. But if you think about the network, the association to the graph is straightforward. Basically, the computational graph expresses the connections and, more specifically, the operations between the different layers or the different tensors. That would be the keyword for today. The intuition is that this relationship is basically kind of compiled beforehand. So you set up your structure, you will have that structure be static. It won't change during the learning, and as opposed to a dynamic graph, in which basically every time you have a new batch of data, every time you have a new epoch to execute, you will basically take the data, pass this data through this virtually defined network of tensors, which will be created on the spot. And the next time you have a new batch, this process is repeated again and again. So you don't have a static fixed structure in memory of a graph. This structure is dynamic. And believe it or not, this is very efficient anyway. I told you the basic of the optimization is based on the backward propagation and gradients calculation. If you have any questions about it, feel free, but I will explain as much as I can in the details later on about it. Because this is kind of fascinating algorithms from a computer science perspective. So when you want to apply a backward propagation, if you have a static graph, there's no problem. So the question now, because the graph is already there, the backward propagation intuitively is just going backwards, so going in the directions as opposed that where you started from. So you started left to right, and in the backward propagation you go the other way. But the question now, you might wonder, how do you do that in the dynamic graph if you don't have the graph? Basically, the idea is to apply a pattern which is called the record and replay. So in the forward step, you do record the different structure the graph has taken, and in the backward pass, the structure will replay back in reverse order. Okay, so we're approaching to the end of this deck of slides. A bit of rundown of the main features of PyTorch we're going to talk about today. So I said you should already know, but probably you don't know if you're here. So that's a sort of a typo there. Okay, this you should know if you attended or you worked already with deep learning things, deep learning frameworks. You're already aware of the concept of tensors, and you definitely know NumPy. And one of the striking features of PyTorch with respect to other frameworks in the deep learning ecosystem is that the API of PyTorch is very, very NumPy-like. NumPy or NumPy, as you like. It's very, very similar. So here you have the NumPy version. No, here is still Torch actually, but the NumPy version is very, very simple. It is very similar. And in addition, you can always move back and forth from a Torch tensor to a NumPy array. We're going to have some few exercises about it if you like. So you can go from tensor to anti-array and the other way back. And the last bit is that you have CUDA support, so you have GPU support. Someone has also defined Torch as a sort of NumPy on GPU, given the fact that the API is very, very similar. But PyTorch is more than that. It's more than a tensor library. And one of the reasons why I do like PyTorch a lot is that it has a very nice design feature from a software engineering standpoint. And we will try to go into the details of it. You have modules and neural networks that are basically subclass of a specific Torch class, the module class, and you basically decompose the definition of your network in two steps. On the one hand, you define the layers, and so the tensors, as in the bit of your network that requires the optimization. And on the other hand, you have the definition of the graph. So you have one method in which this graph is actually composed dynamically every time you pass new data. And so this gives you if you know a little bit of Python, you know that this means that the model will be a callable object, which is very nice. And another thing I really like, oh, that will be the next slide. Yeah, so to complete the picture, you basically have support for optimizer, you have support for backward propagation and update, of course, if you have optimizer, and a plenty of series of loss function you can use, depending on the kind of learning problem you're tackling. And the last bit is just a very nice abstraction related to data. And when it comes to work with data in PyTorch, there's a very nice abstraction called dataset and data loader, and we will play along with it very, very soon. So that's it for this slide. I think so. I'm going to share with you the link in a couple of seconds. So we're going to do 1 minute to set up everything. You shouldn't necessarily require to install anything in your computer. So you should be able to do everything using either Colab, if you know what it is, or Binder if you don't want to do really anything, just like click and everything should be up and running. It will be entirely automatically handled through the environment of the GitHub. Just to give you a glance what I'm going to talk about today and what is the idea I got. I wanted to share. I already told you what I'm going to do, what I'm trying to achieve today with you, and please let me know how am I doing. But when I tackle this topic, I put myself in the perspective of the data science, of the data scientist. So I wanted to give you the practical bits, the usual bits that usually can't find in the paper when you read the paper. So just giving you what you have to do and giving you the impression that it's not that easy as it looked like. This is one hand. And on the other hand, the perspective will be the one of the researcher, and not the general researcher, but also the researcher in biomedicine. So we're going to have some sort of solid background we want to stand on, and we want to don't just get the things off the shelf and use it as it is, but just trying to understand what's going on. So that's the kind of spirit I had when I built this one. And just a bit of content. This was my original plan. I won't cover much about genomics, I am afraid, but I will try to dwell upon about the bioimages a lot, because that's quite important. And in the meantime, giving you technical details about PyTorch and a little bit of interpretability of the model, which is a research topic I'm actually quite interested. So that's it for this deck. This is the reference again for JGI and the social handler if you want to share it. I'm going to hand on the technical bit, so I'm going to close this one. Right. So the thing is, I can't see anything at all. It's been quite of a rush yesterday changing this event. Okay. So here it is. Okay. Or in the meantime, if you have any kind of question, feel free. So I'm going to stop the sharing for a second. If you can still see me. Okay. So, okay, so I don't know how this would do, but let's see. Okay, so oh, okay, sorry, I just realized the repository is still not accessible. I'm going to change the visibility immediately. Sorry for
Hi, I think that's a good suggestion by Jen. Should we just have a kind of a 5 minute kind of comfort break while you make the repository accessible,
Absolutely.
and then
Okay, lovely.
shall we come back? Well, it's 10 to 11 now. How tight's your schedule? If we have 10 minutes, is that okay?
That's brilliant.
Come back at 11. And in the meantime, yeah, if anyone wants to put any more questions in the Q&A, that'd be great. I can see there's a good one in there now, and we'll try and answer those when we've got time. Okay, so see everyone then back at 11. Hi everyone, Valerio, how are you doing? You back?
I'm ready.
Okay, cool. It's 11.
Right. So going to try to share the screen again. I was taking a look at the questions, very good ones actually. Thank you very much for that. Okay, how do I do that? It's a bit of annoying that I cannot share a window, everything.
Yeah, I think you can only share the screen.
This is the event, isn't it?
Yeah, we can see
Fully
the event now.
Okay, okay. Right. So I realized I forgot to put the link to Binder. So now into I hope you can see my screen.
Can you maybe put the link into the chat so that
Yeah,
it's easy to click
do
on?
the me. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Chat. That's the link. I think there should be probably some more sophisticated way to do it, but I don't know how it is. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Doesn't break anything. Okay. I don't actually see my screen, so I hope hopefully it is quite readable. Okay. So yeah, so you can click on my binder here. This will automatically connect to the mirroring of the repository, setting up everything for you. You don't really need to do it to do anything. Otherwise, if you have a Google account, you can use Collaboratory. Thank you. And so you have to go to collab.research.google.com. You can create a new. You can set you should see something like a window like that, and you click on the GitHub tab, and you can set up the URL of the repository directly. So if you do that, that should allow you to open into Colab every single notebook. So what I'm going to do on my hand is I'll try to stay locally as much as I can. Whenever I need some computational, I will go into Colab. You can do really whatever you prefer to follow along. Right. Okay, so I created I'm a computer scientist, so I start counting from 0, and for some reason, and I created a 0 section, whatever that means, which is a warm up, into which I basically collected all the things that I thought I could start to talk about it, and the first thing I wanted to share with you is this notebook, which is basically an excerpt of a very nice paper I tend to mention quite a lot. And this is a very nice paper. And so the title of the paper is 10 Quick Tips for Machine Learning in Computational Biology. The title of my book, on the other hand, my notebook, on the other hand, is 10 Quick Tips for Machine Learning, full stop, which means that it is indeed specifically related to computational biology, but the takeaway message and the suggestions the author makes into this paper can really be applied in any kind of data context. We will see along the way what is specifically or not specifically related, but sometimes more evident in the context of computational biology or biomedicine. and so try to understand what additional level of complexity this field is bringing in terms of a data problem. So this notebook is not technical at all in terms of coding. It's more technical in terms of how you should think of a data problem from the perspective of machine learning. And this is something that, as Natalie already introduced in the introduction this morning, it will end up with an additional extra tip, the 11th, which I introduced, which is related to reproducibility, which is at the end of it, we will see that this is the final bit and the thing that you can't miss it. You can't miss into your experimental pipeline. So some motivation, whatever I already said, basically. So the growth of the size of the data set, the number of data sets, the fact that now every single scientific field is basically a data field. So I bet there's no single field nowadays in the scientific, and probably even not just scientific context, which is not related to data anymore nowadays. So computational biology and bioinformatics, it is really full of data, so it is built in, and as I already mentioned, the ability of machine learning ultimately is to identify patterns in. So we just want to do that. And identifying patterns in the data is indeed the case for computational biology and bioinformatics. The thing is that the author says that machine learning, as well as deep learning, as that's been applied to multiple computational biology problems plenty of times, and despite this paper is from 2017, so this is even more true, this assertion. The thing is, despite its importance, not every time the experimental setting is set up in a proper way, whatever proper means, and we'll try to understand better in a second what that means. In a way, I'm basically going to share with you the kind of machine learning I try to do every time I do find myself into working with a new data problem. And so there is this decalogue. There's 10 simple rules to keep in mind whenever possible. I'm going to read them out loud, and then we'll discuss it. So the first one is check and arrange your input data set properly. So prepare the data. The second one is split your input data set into 3 independent sets. The number 3 is frame your biological problem into the right algorithm category. The number 4 is which algorithm should you choose to start? That's a sort of rhetorical question. Take care of imbalanced data, which is usually the case in the context. Optimize each hyperparameter, and this is the only rule I would argue with, because it's no more the case when it comes. Minimize overfitting. This is very true. Evaluate your algorithm performance using the right metric, and we're going to see what that means. And program your, and the last two are very important and even very, very modern, I have to say, very, very, very up to date, are that you should program your software with open source code and platform for one single reason, that you can ask for feedback, and so it goes to the number 10, ask for feedback and engage with the community. So the power of open source has brought an immense power of people working on the same problem, and so sharing their expertise at different levels. And this is what I do find fascinating about data science, is that you can be a data science, whatever is, you can be a data scientist, depending, even if you have different skills. So you can be more inclined into the coding, you can be more inclined into software engineering, you can be more inclined into the statistics, but not in the coding, and you still can make your contribution. So this is what I do like a lot about it. Okay, So let's try to jump very quickly into every single one, try to understand what I want to tell you. And in the meantime, if you have any question, feel free. I'll try to stay I was going to say stay alert, but that's not the right word to say nowadays. So the first one is check and arrange your input dataset properly. In other words, we can say that this is indeed the pillar of data science. And believe it or not, when it comes to real problem, the machine learning is always the last bit. Most of the time will be spent into working with the data, preparing the data, and also apart from preparing in the sense of pre-processing the data, but also setting up the data in a shape which is in a format which is what a machine learning algorithm is expecting. I'm going to tell you what that is. But the general toy pipeline that you can have in machine learning usually goes from data loading and ends up into the API interface, so the model serving me, and going through pre-processing and model learning. So this is what they tell you when they say data science. But what really is, when it goes into in production, for instance, so when you really want to go online and you want to put your AI, so to speak, in real use case, it's not just data loading, pre-processing and stuff. It's more than that. It's analyzing the data, transforming, validating, splitting, and then building the model, reiterating this learning into multiple steps, and then training at scale when you want to really go in production. In fact, nowadays, there's this hot keyword, which is MLOps, as in operationals for machine learning, which is a very specific term nowadays. So saying that, how to arrange the data properly. And this gives me the opportunity to slightly talk about something you might not be familiar with if you're new with this. I promise it is essentially very simple. So in machine learning, everything is learning from data, but no one has told you how this data should be represented, or what sort of shape this data should have, and if there is any. And so what I'm going to tell you is try to tackle this deep connection, because there's a very deep relationship between machine learning and data from the two angles, from two perspectives. The one is how to represent the data for machine learning models. That's the first research question. The second research question is, what sort of data should I use depending on the model I have, or the other way around? So what model should I use depending on the different types of data I do have process? And this goes to the tip number 4. So we're going to try to find an answer to how should I represent the data for machine learning, and so what's the takeaway message from the tip number 1? Prepare the data. In order to tell you this, I hoped that a picture worth 1,000 words. So I started drawing some sketches, and I'm going to share with you those sketches. If there's anything which is not clear at all, that's my handwriting, so it's entirely my fault, so please let me know. As repeated plenty of times, machine learning is about mapping data to predictions. So the ultimate goal is you have some data, you pass this data to the model, and you want to generate the predictions. So these are the important bit. Sorry. If you want to really replicate this pipeline, as we said, is basically slightly more complicated, and you just start talking about raw data rather than just data. Data typically refers to what goes into the model already. But to generate this data, you have to pre-process and apply some transformation. Not to mention whatever you have to do afterwards when you have the predictions. So in machine learning, as well as in deep learning, data is represented in a very standard way. Every time you have to process some data, you always have a matrix. So you have 2 dimensions. If you already worked with deep learning, you might start wondering, wait a minute, hang on, what are you saying? 2 dimensions? Yeah. So I should rephrase it a little bit. So the most important thing to remember is that the first dimension of your structure is always referred to the sample size, what is called the samples. So the observations that you have on the first one. When we want to translate this terminology into deep learning, it's basically talking about batches, because the kind of learning is based on multiple batches. So it's also called batch learning. But the first dimension is always the dimension of the observation. The other dimension so the second, or second to the infinite, as you prefer, is going to be the dimensions of the features. That is the structure of the data. There's no other clues implied. That's it. And so the features can be indeed multidimensional. You can have one single dimension for the features, and so you have a matrix, really a matrix at the very end. Or otherwise, you have more than one dimension as the features, so as in the case of images, for instance. And when it comes even for medical images, it's even plenty more dimensions, because medical images are much more complicated than RGB images, and in many ways either computational and either technical difficulties, as in processing and representing the data. So that's the second bit. But essentially, it's always sample size and feature size. So you can reduce this representation in two compartments. If you want to go even more into details, the thing is that one thing, and this is particularly true when it comes to deep learning, it has to be always numbers. Deep learning specifically is going to eat numbers. Every kind of data that you have, even textual data, can't be processed directly into that. It has to be pre-processed in a way. And this is particularly interesting because the deep learning, as I told you initially, I told you that basically the feature bit, so the transformation, the representation, is part of the model, which means that this representation of the data can also be learned. And this is also the case of unsupervised learning, or we can talk about embedding, or whatever you like. And so one thing is numbers. The second bit is that it hasn't necessarily need to be dense data, so it could be sparse. And for that bit, we could have support by SciPy or Torch sparse, or a friend of mine a few days ago mentioned me another package which is called sparse, actually, into the PyData, which is apparently very, very effective. This is it for the data. Just to remind you, the supervised machine learning setting is usually considered the very same thing, and we're going to focus on the supervised setting without loss of generality. The extra bit that the supervised machine learning is putting into play is the fact that you don't just have data, you have training data. And this will lead to another tip, which is going to be probably the next one, which is you should split your input data set into 3 independent types. Okay, so now the thing is, so I put this just because I thought, for those of you who were working with this sort of technology for the first time, you're coming from a week full of notions, and I had a look at the material. Everything was super interesting and brilliant. So you now know what supervised machine learning is, what unsupervised is. You also had the chance to put your hands into it and so see how does it work. But usually it comes with a prize. And the prize is working with toy data set. But when you have to do really something, you hardly focus just on training and test data. So the configuration is not like that. It's not that you have some data and you split in 2 sets. You want to do a little bit more. That said, there are though still things to keep in mind when you do the splitting. The very important thing that you never have to forget is that the test data has to be remain unseen to the model. And that is indeed the pillar on which the whole structure of learning is built on. If you leak any information from the test data into the training data so that your model can know some of the information and some data taken from the data that this model will be tested on later, then your learning procedure is entirely flawed, and so any conclusion you're going to derive from there is entirely incorrect. This is one bit. The second bit to remember is I told you that machine learning can be ultimately reduced into matrix multiplication. Now you know what matrix is, and random number generation. There are plenty of cases in which random number generation comes into play into machine learning. And in fact, the usual practice is basically you set up one random seed, one and for all, and you're going to use that for all the bits, even those you never realized. But anyway, regardless how many times you do this, it's paramount important you do it. So fix the seed, because that makes your splitting entirely reproducible. And the reproducibility in this case is more to be intended in terms of replicability, as in if you rerun the same code once again another day, the splitting generated will be exactly the same. That's because it's not real random numbers, it's pseudo-random. Okay. Now here a little bit of accuracy, but that's not really the point now. And so yeah, the accuracy here is just to mention what I said already. So you train on the training data and you test the performance on the data. But we want to do more, and typically what we do is, first of all, try to save another partition of our data. So we don't have just training and test. We still want to have training, validation, and test, also known as development test. So we do keep the test aside, so the test has to remain completely unseen to the model, and that is important anyway. But we additionally have the validation, which is taking another fraction of the training data. And so you might argue, well, even in the context of biomedicine and bioinformatics, I usually have, it's hardly the case that you have plenty of data. Why you want to waste it into keeping them aside as a test data? You want to use it to training. Well, you can set up a very important and solid, in terms of statistics, approach, which is called cross-validation, meaning that you do have a one validation set and the rest is training set, but what is represented by the validation is indeed changing every time. So in one classical example is the k-fold cross-validation, in which you basically have you have your training set split into 5 folds. One fold, and the blue one is going to be the training. It's going to be the validation one. The rest of it will be used in training, and this process will go iteratively into the different folds. So you change every time. So at the final round, every single fold has been used at least once in validation. Tip number 3 is frame your biological problem into the right algorithm. So the answer to this is quite well. Also this tip is quite intuitive and simple, but still very important. In other words, it's really important to understand, and it's not just the case of the bioinformatics. It's for any kind of data problem. The matter when it comes to machine learning is always trying to understand how you turn your data problem into a learning problem. That's the bit. And learning problem means, first of all, what kind of flavor, what kind of setting of learning you want to use or you can't use depending on the data. Either could be supervised learning, could be reinforcement learning, could be unsupervised learning. And after that, if that's going to be classification or regression, depending on the kind of target that you have, it's a categorical variable or a continuous variable, or you can discretize one into another one. There are plenty of decisions you can make. So even if it looks silly as a tip, it is rather not. Tip number 4 is which algorithm should I choose to start with? And the answer to this question is the most obvious. You should use the simplest one. I just want to mention that, so the reason why I'm mentioning this is that in machine learning, as in statistical learning, there is one very popular theorem, which is called the no free lunch theorem, which basically says that there is no one model that works best for every single problem. And so you don't have one to rule them all. You usually have different models working perfectly for some specific settings of data, but not in other cases. And so you might end up wondering, so you're basically saying I should try all of them every time? The answer to that is a little bit more subtle, in the sense that you don't have to try everything every time. You have clues on which you can, and rule of thumbs, and of course experience along the way that you build on, that you can use to probably guess what should work better than others. I just wanted to mention one paper I found on Archive, and that's been published like 7 days ago. And the title of this paper is quite interesting. I thought I reported it, but basically, let me see if I can see it. Yes, sorry. So the title of the paper is this one: is deep learning necessary for simple classification tasks? That's the title of the paper. What the author did in this paper is that they applied, they considered plenty of different tasks, most of the time binary classification tasks, and they compared AutoML and deep learning. AutoML is a technique that was quite in fashion some years ago, but now you use this sort of things also for deep networks. So you have AutoLearn, in which basically you use machine learning to learn the model. So it's a sort of meta learning. And what they found out in this paper was basically that deep learning, so AutoML outperforms simple deep learning classifiers. If you plug in deep learning along with AutoML, the results in terms of performance were improved, so there is an advantage, but the cost of doing that was not worth it. So that's kind of a good takeaway message here, especially nowadays in which we are living into this deep learning era, in which everything seems to be deep learning without even considering other kind of things. And this is the kind of message I'm trying to convey to you. It's not just deep learning nowadays. So you should always keep into your pipeline some baseline, at least, to be standard machine learning. This is particularly the case with biomedical case and also bioinformatics. Take care of the imbalanced data problem. Not all the scientific fields are the same, but machine learning can suffer a lot from different representatives, samples into different classes, even if it's just 2 classes. If you have one class which is more represented than overrepresented than others, the algorithm can suffer into that, and in learning from this data. And so there are no such thing to say about it, but some workarounds to try to adopt to try to cope with it. Something could be class weighting, for instance. So you weight differently the samples belonging. So you you weight less samples of the overrepresented class, or you do some imputation if you can, or work on synthetic data, or you try at the very least some undersampling. So you just remove samples from your data. But it's hardly the case when you don't have that much data. And in addition, and this goes to tips number 7 and number 8 respectively, you can increase the statistics, and at the same time you can use appropriate metrics in order to spot whether the model is really suffering from this unbalanced case or not. As I told you, optimize each hyperparameter is the only tip I should argue with, because this makes sense with classical machine learning, but it's hardly the case for deep learning. You have much more parameter. You typically have millions of parameters in deep learning and plenty of hyperparameters to tackle and to optimize. So my answer would be no. Optimizing each hyperparameter would be mad, especially as the first thing to do. You can probably do it, but you will soon realize that this optimization of the hyperparameter is just necessary to beat the state of the art, is just change the second decimal in your results, no more than that. So the model capacity will still be the same at the very end. But what I want to say to you now is trying to reply to the other bit of data and machine learning. So we first understood what is the relationship from data to machine learning. Now we want to say, I want to say something about the other way. And we can say that data can be shaped differently. So we can have a specific shape, and this shape, as we mentioned already, can be represented as dense data or sparse data. But also the data can be structured or unstructured, and also the type of the data can change. Before talking about the type of the data, let's talk about a little bit about the shape of the data. So you can have structured or unstructured data. So in the case of structured data, typically you want to leverage on the structure, and you want the algorithm to leverage on this structure. And so you might end up working with graphs, working with trees, this sort of structure. In unstructured data, you either go and try to transform and come up with some sort of structure, because ultimately one powerful thing you can do when you have structured data is apply convolution, because convolution is basically, and not just CNN, I'm talking about convolution in general. Convolution is not a technology invented with the CNN, it's just became more important, but it was something already used with Supervised machine. The idea is to leverage on the structure of the data, and you want to express your features in terms of the different parts. That's essentially the convolution. And if you can come up with a structure, you can still fall back to the default one, which is linear models, as in neural network terms, perceptrons or multi-layer perceptron. When it comes to type, on the other hand, you might having different types of data, and the different types of data can lead you to some specific models finally. As in, you can have tabular data, and the tabular data can be numerical and categorical variable, and this is particularly interesting when it comes mixed. So you have to do something. You can have image, you can have video, and that's CNN domain. You can even consider the video as a sequence of frames, so you want to leverage the temporal information. And so you might probably end up in having some recursive network. In scikit-learn domain, there is this guide map, which is quite brilliant actually, which tells you, it's a sort of a path you can follow, depending on the kind of problem that you have and the kind of data that you have at hand. You might end up in being in one of the 4 different buckets of methods that scikit-learn actually supports, as in classification and regression, or for the supervised case, or clustering and dimensionality reduction for the unsupervised case. And so I try to complete the picture, and I put some model there and try to replicate these also to deep learning. Typically, the thing is, and just talking about the supervised learning, you might end up in considering recurrent neural network if you have temporal information, and so time series, for instance, or if you have structure, you always want to try to use some convolution. This is a sort of rule of thumb you should put in place when you have specific kind of data. Nowadays, if you have images, it's quite straightforward to try convolution rather than going to a linear network. It's silly not to try convolution first. So this is the sort of rule of thumb I was mentioning. And that just for the supervised case. When it comes to for the supervised case, you have autoencoders and also convolutional encoders, so you can still work on that. And just to quickly reply to a question appeared into the chat, yes, you can have end-to-end, especially in the unsupervised case, and that's the case of autoencoders. We'll try to see quite a similar example later with respect to medical images. And you can even complicate the scenario. You can have variational autoencoders, and finishing with generative adversarial networks, also known as GANs. In this final bit, you just don't want to learn a specific representation. In the case of variational autoencoders, you just want to learn the distribution of the data, which is sometimes quite effective when you don't have so much data to learn from. Okay, tip number 7 says try to minimize overfitting. I will go very quick on that. This would open an entirely theoretical topic, which is very important. And when you're going to do machine learning seriously in the real case, you can't forget about this bias variance trade-off. In essence, what this trade-off says is that you have always two forces. They are challenging each other. One is the variance, and the other one is the bias. The bias basically reflects the amount of assumptions you do on your model. As in, I'm going to use a linear model, even if the data is not linearly separable. And the variance basically measure the how much the model varies, and so changes in terms of performance as we change the training data. So the more it changes, potentially, the more the model is going to overfit. And so you always want to try to balance this, not using too complicated model against using more sophisticated models, otherwise you're biasing your learning problem too much. And the only takeaway message I wanted to share with you is that there are ways in which you can cope with the bias variance trade-off, and the most obvious one is regularization. In deep learning terms, this is sometimes referred to as weight decay. So we want to change the loss that we are optimizing for in order to take into account the fact that we don't want to exactly follow the pattern found in the model. We just want to do that, but not entirely. So we want to penalize a little bit the learning and the training data in order to favor potentially the model on the generalizability and the test data. Sorry. There's also another quite interesting technique related to what is usually referred to as structural regularization, which came into play with the deep learning, which is the dropout. I'm going to show an example later on how effective a dropout is into regularizing your model. Tip number 8, almost there, is evaluate your algorithm performance with the Matthew correlation coefficient or precision curve. So this tip is very specific. So the author here is actually advocating the use of very specific metric. What I would I would suggest generally is that you have to take into account the fact that most of the performance of a machine learning model have basically driven from what is called the confusion matrix. The confusion matrix is this matrix in which you have on rows and columns, you have actual, so the true classes on the columns and the predicted classes on the rows. Sorry for that. Basically, depending on the different matching between the two, you have the definition of these 4 different categories. You have the true negative, the true positive, the false positive, and the false negative, respectively. So, as a rule of thumb, if you want to read a confusion matrix, basically on the first, in the case of binary case, of course, but these also generalize to multi-class anyway. On the main diagonal, you basically have the corrected one. Off diagonals, you have the wrong ones, and the wrong ones respected to the positive and the negative case. So the false positive, for instance, are those that have been predicted as positive, but they were actually negative, and the false negative is the other way around. So all the metrics used to evaluate the performance of machine learning are actually taken from the confusion metric. The more popular one is the most popular one is the accuracy, or the F1 score, which is the harmonic mean of precision and recall, if you ever heard about it. Accuracy is this one. So it takes into account the correct predictions, so the true positive and true negative, and basically averages with respect to all the predictions you made, wrong or correct. The thing is that it's not taken into account at all the fact that you might have failed on potentially an underrepresented class. And so this metric, the accuracy thing, is not giving you any hint, considering this formulation, is not giving you any hint about the distribution of classes. There is actually a variation of the accuracy, which is called the balanced accuracy, which includes this distribution of samples. On the other hand, the metric correlation coefficient, differently from other metrics, is not a metric that goes from 0 to 1. It goes from -1 to 1, meaning that 1 is entirely matching the predictions with the goal, so the expected. -1 means it matches, but exactly the opposite. So all the positives were predicted as negatives and vice versa. And 0 basically means random. So that's the meaning of the metric correlation coefficient. The difference is that the metric correlation coefficient is actually taking into account all the possible combinations of predictions. That's why the author here is suggesting MCC. And to be entirely fair, this is the kind of metrics I've been using in my last 3 years of experiments, because this is very, very fair. And to give you just a glimpse of how this MCC can help you in spotting something that something is not going as it should, consider these 2 cases the author reports in. So in this case, basically you have true positive as you have 100 samples. So to make the arithmetic simple, you have 90 samples as a true positive, 5 false positive, and 1 true negative, and 4 for negative. So this model is basically okay with the positive, but it's entirely missing the negative one. But if you take a look at just accuracy and F1 measure, you say, well, this model is working. So that I'm very happy about it. If you try MCC, on the other hand, is 0.14, which is very low, and which means basically random, and it gives you the intuition that something has gone wrong. In this case, also, in which the model has entirely overfitted the majority class, you have accuracy of 95%, F1 97%, almost 98%, but the MCC is undefined because you have no true positive and true negative, so you cannot perform this computation here, and so you cannot divide by 0, which means that here you can spot that there's some flaws into the predictions. So the takeaway message is always account for the class distribution. Something I didn't mention, but is probably obvious, is to apply some stratification as well. Okay. And the last two bit is program your software with open source code and platform. In other words, do not reinvent, but try to contribute as much as you can. Plus, I usually mention this too, these two tweets, because they're very true to me, and this kind of conversation hit me when I read it. There was this guy advocating that data science is not really software engineering. It was probably the case some years ago, but it's not that anymore. And we see more and more cases in which if we have flaws in the software, it means that we have flaws in the experimental setting, and which means that all the conclusions you've derived from your data might be potentially wrong. And so you have to take care of your software as much as you can in order to derive better conclusions from the data. And in fact, François Chollet again says that buggy code is bad science, and I do agree with that. As a follow-up, basically contribute to the community and also engage with the community, which is very important. Nowadays, the right way to do it is using GitHub extensively, and if you have a problem with something, open an issue. That's how you engage with the community, and that's it. The extra one I also mentioned already is reproducibility and replicability. So always work and set up your experimental pipeline in order to be at least replicable, as in you want to apply the very same code to different data. So at least you want to achieve that. The ultimate goal will be applying different code and different data and coming up with the very same conclusions, which is, by the way, something we're going to do today, hopefully. Something I really decided to do yesterday was a crazy idea, mad entirely, but it was kind of a nice experience for me, and I wanted to share with you as well. Right, so I'm going to move on now. Do you have any questions so far? Feel free to shout out. So the warm-up now goes more into the technical bit. Finally, you might say. This is about a torch playground. So this one is just to give you a very quick overview of what you can do in PyTorch. And specifically, this first notebook is about giving you an impression that you're working with PyTorch, but potentially you might be working with NumPy too. So just to give you the idea of what is the API to manipulate tensors in PyTorch. Ideally, if you attended yesterday a workshop about TensorFlow, you might now compare what's the difference. And to be entirely precise, TensorFlow up to version number 1, if you remember the two families of models I presented in this morning, I said static graph and dynamic graph. TensorFlow was belonging to the static ones, and using TensorFlow was so difficult. The API was so counterintuitive, I promise, that I know people that spend so much effort in working with the TensorFlow 1 API that now, even if they have the TensorFlow 2 API, which are the ones you've been using yesterday, people don't want to switch because they invested so much and they want to keep using it, even if it's going to be deprecated very soon. But just to give you the idea of how cumbersome was to work with TensorFlow back in 1 year time, so it's not that much time. Now TensorFlow 2 is a sort of hybrid. Is dynamic graph by default as PyTorch is, but it can be go into the static one, because the dynamicity gives you very flexibility into the programming bit. But when it comes to high performance and you really want to go fast, you want to go static because you don't want to waste time in repeating every time the very same operations, as in building the graph again and again. Okay, so first thing first, set up some random seed just in case, really. The most important takeaway message, so feel free to scroll it down, play with it. There are a couple of exercises for you if you want to. Just familiarize with the API. But I'm pretty sure you will find it very, very intuitive, which is one of the striking advantage. And just to give you a little bit of news from the Python community as well, just to tell you that there's a lot of discussion about this, and not the fact that PyTorch is similar to NumPy, but the fact that NumPy nowadays is going to change in the sense that they've been thinking of making NumPy as a sort of framework and a sort of API framework to which all the frameworks should attain to in order to aim for compliance. As in, I don't want to spend so much time in learning a new language because the API is basically a language, especially when it comes to tensor operations. So going very quickly, the main structure, as we might assume, is the tensor. And to cut it very short, the very difference from a NumPy array, which is a multidimensional array as the tensor is the fact that the tensor is giving additionally, in addition to a normal NumPy array, is bringing you the capability of calculating the gradient if you require to. And in fact, if you allow me to jump directly, so in this notebook you will find some hints of how the API is, how can you build tensor from lists, from NumPy array, how can you turn, so like using from NumPy function, for instance, how can you play with the different data types and or random numbers generation. But if you allow me to just jump to the gradient bit, basically, this is an extensive section about reshaping. This is something we usually do, as in working with different dimension. And so you have view, which is basically the reshape in NumPy. There's actually a question about it, but it's very intuitive. Also, it's written somewhere already. And also you have the permute, and these usually happens when you work with images, for instance, in which there's an essential difference. In Torch, if you have RGB image, you're expecting the channel to be the first dimension, not considering, of course, the batch dimension. So the channel should be the first dimension, and then the rows and columns, as in this is usually referred to as channel's first representation. And there is one important reason for that, because it's more efficient in the GPU, and it's even more parallelizable. And in NumPy, on the other hand, which lacks any support of GPU, as you know, the channel is the last dimension. So when you have to move data from NumPy to PyTorch, you always have to remember to switch dimension, sorry, to swap dimension. And so you have methods for that. Yes, and the bit I wanted to show you before moving on here is the computing of the gradients. The way in which you basically tell PyTorch that you want the gradient to be computed is basically passing this additional parameter to the constructor of the tensor, which is called the requires grad equals to true. It is false by default because, as you might assume, it brings additional computation, and so it affects the performance. But if you really want to, you can enable it, and you typically want to have it when you have deep networks because that's the way in which you optimize it. And but in that case, you don't have to specify it because it's automatically implied. We're going to see very soon how to do it. And the last bit is how could you have CUDA support, so GPU support. If you switch, so if you run this notebook into Colab, you should see some difference. So for the sake of clarity, I'm going to do it just to give you the idea of what I'm really talking about. This is it. So if I open it, just in case you never used Colab before, So basically, the first thing you have to do is to go into runtime. Let me know if you require any zoom in. You have to change the runtime and say you want Python 3, and more importantly, you want a GPU acceleration. So Colab is locating some, yes, a not robot, kinda, and it's allocating some virtual GPU to you. Now that we are ready to go, okay. Now PyTorch is automatically installed, so you don't have to install anything. It's already there. So if I do, yes, please. If I execute the cell, now I have Torch imported. If I jump down, oh, I can use this. I can jump here to the CUDA tensor. If I do print if CUDA is available, it should say yes. And in fact, it is. If I now do generate random tensor, and then I move the data to the device, and the device could be CUDA or CPU. Here it's automatically defined depending if the CUDA is available or not, but we know it is. So the device will be CUDA this time. And so the to method is the key. So if we do something like that, we're basically allocating the memory in the main RAM and then moving the tensor to the memory of the GPU. You might already assume that when you do this moving bit, it cannot just be limited to the single tensor. You can even move the entire model. And moving the model means that you're basically moving all the tensors the model is bringing together. So if I do this and I do print the device property from this tensor, I should see GPU, but it does say, oh, sorry, been interrupted. It says CUDA 0, yes, CUDA 0, which is of course the only one we have. And if we want to go back to the CPU now, we can remove it back. There is an important reason why we want to play with the devices, and the reason is this one: you can't actually have operations going between tensors or among tensors physically allocated on different devices. And that's why when you move the model, you basically move it entirely. And when you have the batch of data, you first move the data onto the GPU if you're using it, and then you do the actual prediction. In fact, I have to have all the, and this was supposed to break actually, because Y has been allocated on the CPU by default, but then X was still on the GPU, and so this cannot be applied. I have to move everything on the CPU or the GPU, and in that case, it's going to work. Right. Yes, so this is affected once again. Okay, so let's start digging more into the framework now. I want to spend no more than 10 minutes about it, so we can practically see something related to healthcare in the last hour. In the meantime, again, if you have any sort of questions, feel free to ask. In this notebook, basically, I'm going to tell you. So I'm going to much more into the details to give you what is the flavor of working with PyTorch when you do deep learning. I probably already mentioned, but this picture, I find this picture very, very straightforward and absolutely brilliant. You will find all the reference of all of this in case you're interested in getting more. And in fact, this is taken from a book I definitely recommend. So the entire processing of the network is based on a very simple algorithm, and especially when it comes, so it's slightly more complicated when you have more complex architectures as the recurrent one. But when you have the forward network, the feed forward network, as the multi-layer perceptron or even the convolutional networks, basically the whole process goes like that. So you have a forward step in which you basically have the data going into the network, and then and then you pass the data in, you generate the prediction, you calculate the error, you go back, and you keep on iterating that. So that's entirely the process. The bit we don't know yet about in details, and again, this is what I'm trying to give you today, as much details as I can, and and also the curiosity to have a look at it, because ultimately the only way, if you're really into this sort of things, the only way in which you can know that you can use to know better is basically having a look at the code finally. Which is something I did at some point, so I will be skipping it anyway. So the only thing I wanted to say about that in the next 3 minutes is that Autograd is the central package into Torch, and Autograd is implementing an algorithm which is very fascinating. And if you're really into the sort of things as I am, I strongly recommend you to have a look at it. Automatic differentiation is, in one sentence, in one single definition, is an algorithm which allows you to compute exact derivatives in constant time, and that's brilliant. So that is essentially all the back end on which all the deep learning machinery is building on. If we didn't have that, there was no machinery at all. So you can read it through, but just to give you the information that the differentiation and the automatic differentiation is going to be third-class citizen, even in programming languages. There are people working on having constructs for automatic differentiation as built-in operators in programming languages. And so have a look at that if you're interested. The only thing I wanted to tell you about it is that automatic differentiation, there's a nice paper referenced it, by the way. You can read it